Welcome to our program today. It's so good you could join us. We'd love it if you wanted to get more of our programs, know what we're covering. Feel free to hit the subscribe button. And also, if you like what we share, hit the like button. A comment is always good. Looking forward to hearing from you. I want to touch a subject today that sadly in the Christian church is really a little vague, and in many places really there's an ignorance of an understanding of what is happening in the world concerning Israel, concerning Hamas, what's taking place in the madness of the Middle East and everything else. This little tiny nation of Israel, so small, and have a look at the comparison of this tiny little nation compared to Australia. It's a very, very small place in size, tiny. You go into Israel, I've just been there. I'm going to talk about things we saw there. It's a very small place, but there it's jam-packed. It's like all of these amazing, we're in the valley of Elah, where David and Goliath stood and faced each other, and we're driving through the valley of Elah. And then we were looking at Megiddo and looking at all of these things from the Bible just recently, and Israel is amazing. It's small, seemingly insignificant, and yet the attention of the world, more than anything else right now, is on this nation. It's a little nation that is under pressure from every side, surrounded by enemies on every side who want her gone. They want the Jews out from the river to the sea. Palestine, they chant, shall be free. And then we've had the horrors of what took place with Hamas coming over the wall. We've just been down there to the wall and been into some of the kibbutz down there and the area where they were holding a big dance where something like 364 young people were massacred. Hamas came over the wall, came through, and absolutely ruthlessly mowed down everybody they could find. The most despicable things took place that the newspaper won't tell you, that media doesn't tell you. All the focus is on how bad Israel is, and yet over 1,000, 1,200 people brutally murdered, little children. The things that took place with the hostages, horrendous situation. What is it all about? Where does it go back to? I think it gets traced back right to the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent. And the seed of the serpent, which is the devil, has a hatred for the seed of the woman, which is the nation of Israel. That hatred is seething and building, and it's coming to the point where it says in Zechariah, the time will come when all the nations will be gathered against Jerusalem. Jerusalem itself will become a stumbling block. You read this in Zechariah chapter 12, a stumbling block, and all the nations who come against it are going to fall. Nations that have come against Israel in history have been broken. God says, I'll bless those that bless you and curse those that curse you. And that has been the case through world history. Let's get an understanding of what is happening there with Israel and also with the Palestinians. Who are the Palestinians? Why was the nation, which is now Israel, called Palestina? Well, we have to go back in the scriptures, and people ask the question, who really owns the land? Whose land is it? Does it belong to the Palestinians? Does it belong to any of the other nations around, or does it belong to Israel? We need to go right back and understand that going back to the book of Genesis chapter 15, God spoke to Abraham. He was Abram then. The scripture says the Lord appeared unto Abram in a vision. We read in Genesis 15:1. And he came to him and he said, I am your shield, I'm your exceeding great reward. And Abram said, well, Lord, what are you going to give me? He said, I'm childless. You've promised me a child, and the only child I've got is one of my servants is my heir. I don't have any children. God said, no, you're not going to be childless. In fact, you're going to become the father of many nations. You're going to be the father of a great nation and the father of faith, really, to many nations. and God began to reveal things to him. And the extraordinary thing is that God cut a covenant with him. God made a covenant, literally cut a blood covenant with Abraham. The land of Israel was established as Israel right back with Abraham, and with a covenant cut in blood. The Bible says that, and I'm going back to Genesis 15 verse 18, it says, in the same day, basically the Lord had said to Abram, I want you to cut animals in half. I want you to cut them in pieces and lay them out. And birds, I want you to lay sacrifices out. And then the fire of God went between the pieces. And it says that at that time, in that day then, God made or cut a covenant. A covenant that he established as an everlasting covenant. And he said to Abram, unto your seed have I given you this land. Sealed with a covenant of blood, with those sacrificial animals that really were pointing forward to the blood of the one that was coming, King Jesus. He said, I'll give you this land. How far does it extend? He said, I give it to you from the river of Egypt, which is the Nile, right across into Iraq to the river Euphrates. That is the land that was actually promised to Israel, not the little tiny strip that the world is saying, split it up, cut it up, give it away, hand it over. God said, Abram, from the river Nile to the river Euphrates, and all these people groups in this whole region are going to be moved to make way for this land that I'm giving to you as a covenant. God made a covenant with Abraham that firstly was a covenant with his people, that he would bring forth a people that were his, and they're still his people. They may not be walking with Jesus. They may not be saved. They may be separated because they haven't been saved, but they're still a people upon whom the Lord's hand rests. Even if they're far away from him, God has a huge plan for Israel. In fact, he says that through you, Israel, in the last days, my name is going to be vindicated on the planet. Not for your sake, but for my name's sake that's been blasphemed through the nations. So God made a covenant with Abraham that firstly concerned his people, the blessing that would be on them. And we've only got to go to Israel today to see the blessing that is in that land after they came back. And they've only been back since 1948, and where they were separated for nearly 2,000 years. And so he made a covenant firstly with Abraham. Then he made a land covenant. Firstly, a covenant of the people, a covenant of the land. Then he made a Davidic covenant, and that covenant is that the throne of David would be established again, and that Jesus himself would come and reign from the throne of David for 1,000 years. And then finally he promised there will be a new covenant from which we get the New Testament, a new covenant with Israel, where he will, instead of the law being something they're trying to do with their mind and by action, it will actually come into their hearts, and a promise that he's going to sprinkle them with clean water and so on. So there are 4 covenants. And it's interesting with these covenants that they are contested. Will Israel ever be driven out? No. No. They were in 70 AD. They've been exiled twice. The first exile, when they were taken into Babylon, after the northern tribes had been taken into Assyria, 606 BC thereabouts, they were taken into Babylon. 70 years later they came back, exactly as Daniel prophesied. But now we've had the scriptures in Ezekiel where God says, I will bring you back, Ezekiel 36, Ezekiel 37, I'll bring you back from the lands where you have been scattered, and the land will blossom. And they're not going to go out again. They will not be removed again. I don't care what Iran says, what Iraq says, what Russia says, what any of the nations say, Israel are in the land. In the book of Genesis 26, the land and the promise of the land was then passed on to Isaac. And God spoke to Isaac and declared to him in Genesis 26 verse 3, sojourn in this land, I'll be with thee, I'll bless thee, unto your seed I will give all these countries, I'll give this to you, and I will perform the oath which I swear unto Abraham my father. So now we have the covenant with Abraham and Isaac, but he is called the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He's not the God of Abraham and Muhammad. He's the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He's the God of the Jewish people. In Genesis 28 verse 10, we read that Jacob went out from Beersheba and he went towards a place called Haran. And he came to that place, and there God took him, and he went to sleep, and he had a dream, and he saw a ladder with angels coming and going. And the Lord then came to him and spoke to him, and he said to him in Genesis 28:14, thy seed shall be as the dust of the earth, you'll spread to the west and to the east, and to the north and to the south, and in thee and in thy seed shall all the families of the earth be blessed, which is what he said to Abraham in Genesis 12. And he said, behold, I'm with you. All the places you go, I will not leave you, and so on. And he established to him, this land is yours. He said, the land I gave to Abraham and Isaac in Genesis 35:10-12, I give to you and to your descendants after you. And at that point, we really know there was the establishment of the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. It is an eternal covenant promised by God. Each of these covenants are sorely and heavily contested. Absolutely contested. Where are they contested? The Abrahamic covenant is contested by who? This relationship with God, this relationship with the Jews, who is it contested by? Well, I'll tell you now, it's contested by the world. Anti-Semitism or anti-Jewish understanding is so rife on the planet that is more hostile and more vicious than the attitude to any nation on the earth. Who is opposed to Israel? Who's opposed to them as a people? Anti-Semitism and hatred of the Jews, seemingly without reason in most cases, is all over the world. People, Jewish kids in America, having to hide in rooms so they don't get beaten up just because they're Jewish. In our own city, I had the chance to speak in a synagogue not so long ago to some Jewish people, and that morning there was a firebomb in one of the synagogues in Melbourne. We have crowds shouting, backing Hamas, and even our own nation has put its backing more to Hamas than to Israel, which I find very difficult to grasp or understand. If we look at the United Nations, and I was listened to a man preach, and he talked about the sanctions of the United Nations General Assembly. And between 2006 and 2024, the sanctions against Israel numbered 153. The total against all other nations on the earth, 71. Between 2006 to 24, the United Nations Human Rights Committee had 108 sanctions against Israel, sanctioned against human rights, while Iran had 15, Russia 10, Venezuela 4, and other nations probably none, and yet Israel in the United Nations are pretty much hated by every nation. Even our own nation of Australia has put their hand on Hamas rather than on the nation of Israel. God says, I'll bless those that bless you, and I will curse those that curse you. So we look at a nation that has promises, the Abrahamic promise of the relationship, contested by the world. The land. Who's contesting for the land? For this little tiny piece of land. It's been contested by Islam. The Islamic nations want Israel gone, out of there. The end of the last century, in fact, going back into the 1800s, previous century, the place was a dust bowl, a desolate place, spoken of by Mark Twain as just a desert region. And yet today, to go there, it is flourishing. Glass houses, trees. It's one of the greatest exporters of flowers in the world. It's a nation that's blossoming, and the deserts are blooming. You can go down south, and on one side is the Negev desert of sand, the other side blooming like the rose. It is extraordinary, exactly as the Bible prophesied. The third of the covenants is the Davidic covenant, and that is the understanding that Jesus is coming back, and he's going to reign from Israel for 1,000 years, and we will rule and reign with him on the earth. And then at the end of that will be the great white throne judgment, and then will come the new Jerusalem. Do you know who the greatest opponent of the understanding of the Davidic covenant is? It's the church today. Most churches, a highest percentage, probably 90%, are amillennial. They just believe people die and go to heaven, and that's it. They don't actually believe that Jesus is coming back to rule and reign on the earth, and the nations of the earth are going to go up to be with him. I'd love to spend time. Maybe I'll do a section explaining that whole area and putting that into some understanding. But the real opposition of the Davidic covenant, really, to, as I see it, replacement theology, where the church thinks they're the new Israel and all the rest, and just the basically the understanding there's no millennial reign of Jesus. It's the church that in many cases hold back the understanding of Israel and their place. So let's go a little bit back where we were and have a look at Hamas for a moment and the Palestinians. Are they the rightful owners of the land? I think the Bible makes it very clear, and the ancient scriptures make it very clear who the land was given to. The Muslim people will say, hey, Abraham goes back to the beginning as well. I think it's very evident that the covenant that was made with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So where does the Palestinian thing come in? Where does the very name Palestinian come in? To understand that, we really have to go back to 130 AD. If we go back to 70 AD firstly, we know that Titus Flavius Vespasian came into the land with the legions, sacked the city or laid siege to the city, and then went in, and the great fighting that occurred in the temple area, that whole temple area that we see today ran with blood, and basically the scattering to the nations, the diaspora, the scattering occurred, and multitudes of Jewish people were scattered to every part of the earth, scattered everywhere, as slaves, sold as slaves. Many of them fled, but certainly there was a scattering all over the earth. There were some uprisings after that. There was a man called Ben Kokba. He rose up and led a revolt that finished up with the death of all those people who suicided up on Masada. And then Hadrian. Back there, the Romans were so fed up with Israel, the revolts of the zealots, that they came to a point of going, we will scrape these people out of history. We will remove them from history. And so they said, we will name this region by a new name. And they came up with a name that they thought was the most hated name they could find. A name that they didn't use the name Amalekite, because the Amalekites had sort of somehow become the Idumeans. King Herod was an Idumean, and that was almost like they were considered by the Romans to be sort of brothers that didn't get on. But they recognized that the people that hated Israel the most outside of them was probably the Philistines. And so they took the name for the Philistines, and they called the nation Palestina, which literally means Philistine, the land of the Philistines. Even the name Palestinian, if we really understand it, means Philistines. It's interesting that the Gaza Strip was the last bastion. It was the bastion of the Philistines. That whole area, Israel gave them that area. They actually had a very, very nice section on the coast, a beautiful area. Israel supplied all the water. They supported them. And yet there's something in the heart of the Palestinians that say, as from 1948, we want this land back. This is our land. We want this. We're taking this. We are totally committed to the destruction of Israel. And so we have the situation right now where Israel is there under the hand of God, and the nations around are committed to its destruction. It's a very interesting place. The focus of the earth is upon Israel. And in the next session, I want to talk about what the future looks like. Where's it going to go? What's going to take place? How's it all going to happen? And the Bible gives us pretty good details, or certainly good understanding of how things are going to look. So we'll get into that. In the meantime, there is this hostility that exists. It is a hatred, a burning, blistering hatred from those outside saying, we want to expel Israel. All over the world, people have grabbed the catch cry, river to the sea, Palestine will be free, and they're shouting it all over. But I want to tell you, they're not dealing with the people of Israel. They're dealing with the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So that's a little bit of background as to where things are at. And in the next session, we're going to talk about where things are going to go. God bless you. Thank you for tuning in.